Hi and welcome back to Bounce Forward with me, Tiff Hall. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this podcast, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present. Now, there was a time I looked in the mirror and I just didn't recognise myself. It was months after the birth of my second child, my daughter Veda, and aside from 40 kilos of weight gain, I didn't recognise myself largely because of my tummy. Now, we've all heard of the mum tum, a tummy that you keep for months, sometimes years after having your baby, that hangs low. It's also referred to as a pouch, and in the medical world, it's called an apron. Despite being 6 months postpartum, my stomach hung down over my thighs and was swollen, looking like I was still pregnant. I was even approached by someone in the street to ask if I was expecting again. I was mortified. I know you shouldn't compare yourself to others, but at the time, my friends and even my very own sister had had babies within weeks of me giving birth to Veda, and they were out of their maternity clothes and even back into their jeans. Don't get me wrong. All mum tums and tummies and stomachs are beautiful in all shapes and sizes, but I desperately wanted my strength back and to feel more confident in myself again. I felt so self-conscious of my mum tum and even a little ashamed as a fitness professional. Why couldn't I fix this? What would people think of a trainer with a mum tum? Would they still trust me? My first pregnancy, my tummy went back quite easily, but the second time around, I was 6 years older, far busier, and my journey back to fitness was slower and more frustrating, with less time, conflicting schedules, and so much less energy. I was exhausted. Although I was training and working my core, I was not seeing the results with my stomach and core strength, and I'll share the progress photos with you on my Instagram. I needed help. Something wasn't right. So I reached out to my friend Bec Libratore, a women's health physio, for an assessment and some guidance, and what I learned from her blew my mind. Now, we have a mum tum program called MumBod on the TXO app. You can check it out if you like. It's all about improving your core strength and that mum tum aesthetic if you want to change it. So Bec's joining me on the podcast today, and I couldn't be more excited. Bec, welcome to Bounce Forward. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks so much for having us.
You have had such an impact on my personal journey with my health and fitness, because when I met you, I was really struggling with my tummy area. Not only was it a lack of strength, but it was also the aesthetics. I was uncomfortable with it overhanging, and how big my tummy was, and that people were still asking me if I was expecting, 6 months after the baby. So I want to start with asking you, what causes a mum tum?
When you're pregnant, there's lots of changes that occur, obviously, to fit a baby. And we've got abdominal muscles that, thank goodness, have been designed so that they stretch and allow that baby to fit comfortably inside. But afterwards, there's a whole lot of recovery that needs to happen to get those muscles back to where they were. So there's lots of elements to it. So I think traditionally everyone's just thought it's about the abdominal separation dram, and just use that as the main reason. And as physios, we were pretty cautious with our recommendations were for people. They were really basic exercises that probably weren't doing a whole lot, which we now know from the research. But there's a whole lot of other things. There's what's going on with those actual abdominal muscles. There's so many muscles around there, and we can have a situation where the muscles, some muscles are working harder and some muscles aren't. The lower abdominal ones, which is the lower part of your six-pack muscle, they've been stretched the most. So that's where you expand when you have the baby, down the bottom first, and that's what gets the most stretched. So it's not surprising that those muscles, really struggle to turn on after you've had bubs. And then when you go straight back into doing the fitness and the exercise, and you're just doing the core exercises as you've done before, often it's just the upper abdominals that are doing all the work without you knowing, and the lower abdominals are having a little bit of a holiday. So you're working really, really hard, but actually the lower abdominals are not engaging at all, and so you're not getting the results that you want.
That blew my mind when you said that my lower abdominals were asleep and I had just neglected them.
Yeah.
And that I was overusing my upper. And I'm a trainer, so I thought I was working my core pretty well, but it just blew my mind. And And I remember seeing something on your Instagram with the balloon. Can you take us through the balloon analogy? Because I just love that.
Yeah. So if you imagine if you're holding a balloon that's sort of half full and you squeeze the top of the balloon, all the air is going to go to the bottom. And so that the air in the bottom will bulge out. And so that tends to be what happens when those upper abdominals are too tight. They'll pull and tighten. And then the lower abdominal muscles tend to bulge out a little bit just in terms of the appearance. Okay. So if you've got cinching in of those upper abdominals, the lower abdominals are going to look, by comparison, larger and give you that appearance, I suppose, of a mum tum. That's, there's many things that we see when we assess people's abdominal walls, but that's by far the most common one that we see. And so when we do our rehab, it's a lot about educating people about getting those lower abdominals working and, letting the upper abdominals rest and working on any other areas that might be tight that is contributing to that.
So where do you start? Where do you start if you're struggling with a mum tum? And is it ever too late to train your lower abdominals? Yeah, never too late. And, we've talked about before, it's not necessarily just about women that have had babies. There's women that have lots of bloating around their lower abdominals, so they have a similar type of situation. But I just think lower abdominals in females is generally the muscles are just not strong. And I think that's from an early age when we develop in puberty. Those muscles just tend not to be, the area that we specifically work on. So, basically getting those muscles activating, finding those muscles, turning them on, understanding what's going on with your body and having a bit more of an understanding. And that's what our program was about, is we really wanted to give people that understanding. So our program is a little bit different to like a general exercise program that you get, in that we have tutorials before you start, where we really want people to try and understand what's going on with their body so they can be following along. And then they can incorporate all the things that they've learned from our program in their general training that they're doing as well. Yes. And is the strength training and training your lower abdominals enough to transform a mum tum, or are there other things that you have to incorporate to tighten your tummy and lift it and tone it? Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I loved working with you and on your program as well, because you're absolutely right. Just doing these abdominal strengthening exercises is not going to solve the majority of people's issues. There's usually other things going on. Weight gain post-baby is really common, or just generally weight gain, and that's where postmenopausally or just females put on their weight. So weight loss is going to be a big part for a lot of people. So with your program, you've got so many options. You've got the meal plans, but you've also got the cardio exercise and the more high-intense exercise that needs to be done alongside these exercises, which is exactly what you did. We've made no secret in saying that you worked really hard on your lower abdominals. I had to lose 40 kilos. But you were doing everything else as well. Yes. So we just made sure that you were doing had the correct technique, and we really focused on that, but you were doing lots of other things in the background from the Tiff program. And it was hard. It was really hard to keep my upper abdominals out of it and to activate the lower ones only and to focus on that area. It was really hard, but once you get it and it clicks, you just go from strength to strength really very quickly. So if you're out there and you're worried that, I'm just not getting it, it will come. Yeah. It will come. Yeah. Is there anyone, Bec, who can't do lower abdominal strengthening, like C-section, or if someone has ab separation? Is there anything that you would rule out? Yeah, so in terms of the program we developed, with any sort of physio program, we always recommend that you go and see, if you're unsure about anything, go and see a specialist, whether it's a GP, a specialist, or a pelvic health physio. And that's if you've got pain, a medical condition, or the exercises are just not feeling right for you, or you have any pelvic floor symptoms. But as a general rule, 3 months postnatal, after you've had your clearance from your maternity caregiver, and we don't want anyone who's pregnant doing these exercises. So How far along after pregnancy can you pick up, like, doing lower abdominal exercise?
Oh, anytime. And when are we not postnatal, really?
So like 3 months after.
3 months is the earliest. Yep. And once you've had that clearance, from your obstetrician or your midwife or your GP, whoever that you're seeing, and just check that they're happy for you to start strengthening. Then there's abdominal separation, which is a huge area that has been traditionally spoken about. The research, there was a fabulous article by Danica Benjamin, a systematic review. So for those people that aren't research nerds out there, a systematic review is the highest level of evidence we have. So it's looking at all the studies that were done in this area and putting together all that evidence. And so what they found about abdominal separation is that abdominal exercises can reduce that by a small amount, about half a centimetre. But actually what the issue is, it's probably not the separation. It's probably everything else. And there's so many benefits from doing, working on the global muscles as well and spending less time focusing on that abdominal separation.
So what sort of amount of separation should you just not worry about and start strengthening your abdominals?
Yeah.
Like
So we're thinking about 2 to 3 centimetres now is quite a normal separation postnatally, and postnatally is forever. And a lot of the recovery happens in that first 6 weeks, and after that, that's often where it's at. In the tutorials, we talk about things to be aware of with abdominal separation. We tend to be quite cautious. So if you are getting what we call tenting, which if you have abdominal separation you will know, where you might sit up and notice that it domes a little bit. So we give some cues to help to stop that doming. And then if you can reduce that doming, you're quite fine to continue with that exercise. So if you're getting lots of doming, we probably would suggest getting clearance before starting the program. But otherwise, if you're not getting any doming, then it's quite fine to be doing abdominal exercises, and it can have a significant benefit. Because even when you came and saw me, you had quite a small dram. I've got quite a small dram as well. And you thought it was your dram because that's what you'd heard about abdominal separation. But then, when we looked at it, you had that, but that was your upper abdominals. That wasn't what was bothering you.
True.
So I think there's this common misconception out there that when you're unhappy with your abdominals, that it's the abdominal separation, which in most cases, I find is actually not the case.
Yeah. And just this, throughout this whole journey, what's blowing my mind is everyone's always like, you got to work your abs, you got to do your core, you got to do your crunches, but you said to me, not all core exercises are created equal.
Yeah.
And that just has changed everything for me.
Yeah.
So targeting the lower abdominals and really strengthening them has lifted my tummy.
Yeah,
It's lifted it up.
Like you were doing planks and you could hold them for quite a long time, but we could see your upper abdominals were just having a rest. They weren't doing anything. And then we changed it to get you activating your lower abdominals. You couldn't hold the plank anywhere near as long, but you were really targeting those muscles. So the program is a lot of really subtle changes, and we're wanting to educate people about being able to find those little nuances themselves and being able to incorporate that going forward in their exercise programs within the Tiff XO program.
So, Bec, what about the pelvic floor? What role does that play? Because when I came to see you, I was like, is it dram? Is it pelvic floor? What's going on? I feel like my whole core has collapsed here.
Yeah, absolutely.
What role does the pelvic floor have?
I'm hugely passionate about the pelvic floor muscles, being a pelvic floor physio. The pelvic floor muscles play a huge role, and they go through a huge trauma, not just with a vaginal birth, but with the 9 months of carrying a baby. So we know that they're weakened from carrying a baby. So the pelvic floor muscles, signs that there are issues with the pelvic floor can be leakage with coughing or sneezing, or needing to go to the toilet to wee and not making it, trouble holding in wind, or pressure in the vagina, or a lump or a bulge, which is known as prolapse. And they're things that we commonly see as a pelvic floor physio. So if anyone has signs or symptoms that, I would highly recommend that they go and see a pelvic floor physio for an individual assessment. In the program, we do some an introduction to pelvic floor exercises, because we're so passionate about that, in different positions and just showing different ways to work the pelvic floor muscles. If you have any symptoms, it is recommended that you have a pelvic floor assessment before beginning, because you need to know that you're contracting, but you also need to know that you're relaxing those muscles as well. So, we absolutely postnatally, just postmenopausally, generally cannot neglect those pelvic floor muscles. They are very, very important to us.
Yes. So, Bec, are we talking Kegels in working the pelvic floor? Like, what? Yeah.
So the Kegels is the American term essentially for pelvic floor muscle exercises. We call it pelvic floor muscle exercises. So essentially it is the same thing.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Bec.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to rate and review us on your podcast app. Now, Bec and I have designed a core strengthening program on TXO called MumBod. So check that out in the app if you want to train with us and improve your core strength or mum tum. You can also email me at bounceforward@novapodcast.com.au or connect with me on Instagram at tiffhall_XO. I love hearing your feedback and stories, and it really helps me to bring you eps that will keep us bouncing forward together. Happy days.